Still have people strolling in. Always happens on Saturday. Sure, it's the same for anybody watching this remotely. Ooh, I need to delete that class video link. Oh, good. It's not actually there. But how's everyone doing today? Good? Yeah? All right. So today is going to be a little different than what we've been doing so far. For anybody who's watching remotely, that'll be the same case. The video is going to be much shorter. The session up here is going to be much shorter because what I want to do is give people a chance to get some more hands-on practice, especially when we're together where you've got the mentors or your peers to ask questions of and work through. So what I've got is a pretty short set of topics to cover. Nothing that's really particularly new except for being able to get some user input and run a little bit of code in a browser, because that's just one of the easiest ways to get user input. And then the rest of the class period, I'll just probably end the video, and the rest of the class period we'll be working on what is essentially the homework. So if people want to, they can leave, but I'd really encourage you to stay here and try to work through stuff so we can, you can ask questions. We can talk about different options for the solutions and stuff. So I've posted a lesson 5 homework file just before this class that's up on that GitHub page. I'll post a link to it after we're done going over a little bit of new material for today. And then people can start working through that. It might be, for some people, that might be too much stuff. I tried to keep it pretty reasonable. There are a few more things I would still even like to add in there, but I'll make those in another file now since I didn't get them there at first, and I don't want to be changing the file after people have already started looking at it. But don't feel like you have to work through every problem that is on there or that you have to accomplish all of them. Some of them may push you a little too much, but you should definitely be able to work through some of them. It's broken into basically 2 major sections. So I'll talk about that a little bit once we get through the basic material for today. To start with though, are there any questions about what we talked about last time? Any questions about null or undefined, the 2 new types that we learned about? No? Okay. How about while loops? Did anybody practice anything with those in between? Don't worry, you're going to get plenty of practice with those today. All right. Then really the new topics I wanted to cover is a very, very limited introduction, very, very tied down introduction to using JavaScript on the web and how it works. And the purpose of this is so that you guys will be able to start writing programs that are more interactive and that aren't purely static. So the program can vary based off of some input, as opposed to you just setting a number or me setting a number at the top of the program. The programs will be able to change based off what somebody puts into the program, and it'll need to be more dynamic. So the most basic idea here is that you can run JavaScript on a website by loading it on a page using a script tag. And don't worry, you don't understand all the details of setting up a web page and loading it using a script tag. This is mainly just a way for us to run our JavaScript in a little bit of a different environment. So we'll definitely dig into some more of this over time. I've got in the notes here an example of how to do it, and we're going to do this. I'll do this live just so you can see what I'm talking about as well. Over here in Cloud9, let me zoom in a little bit for you, but what I'll go ahead and do is I'm going to create just an index.html file. So I'm just using this new file capability over here, and I'll make an index.html file, which is HTML is the language of browsers. If you're not familiar with that, it's what they speak. And so this is just saying, here's a file that's intended to be read by a browser. That's how it gets displayed. And it's just a markup. It's a special syntax for it to know how stuff works. And then the basics of this, I'm going to cheat a little bit because the Cloud9 environment gives me some nice shortcuts. You guys, if you're working in Cloud9, will have access to this as well. If I type HTML, since I've already called this an HTML file, Cloud9 is smart and it says, oh, this is an HTML file. I'm going to give you some tools to make it easier to write HTML. So once I type HTML, it tells me, oh, are you trying to put in an HTML snippet? If I hit tab, this is a lot like the tab completion that we talked about on the command line. It actually inserts the basics of this HTML file for me. So I didn't have to write all that out. It's just a nice little shortcut. Then the two major sections of any HTML file, you have your head section, which is stuff that doesn't really render on the page. It's describing a lot of content or structure about the page, but it's not rendering on the page directly. And then you have the body. And that's what renders on the page. So like if we said, you know, hello world, that's what would render. And in Cloud9, you can actually run this HTML file. If that's what you have open and selected, if you click the run button, what it's going to do is open a window down here telling you it's started. This is actually a web server that's running. And if you click on this link, you've got two ways to open this. It's a little low on the page. Let me drag it up a little bit so people can see it. So open this down here. You click on it, it'll give you two options. You can open or open in preview. So if you choose open, it's going to open a new tab in your browser. And you'll probably get a little warning the first time you do that that tells you, oh, you're running a file from Cloud9. You know, are you sure you want to do this, etc. If instead you click open in preview, it's going to open it in a tab right here, and you'll be able to see what's going on there. Both of those work for the context that we're doing right now. It's not going to make much of a difference. So building on that now, if I actually want to have some JavaScript in this, normally you would put it down in this body section. I'm going to put it up in the head. Yes?
So I was just going to ask that, like, edit in real time or like
I think it's just a browser. I don't think it edits in real time. That's a good question. We can check real fast, right? I think people should always, you know, ask a question like that and then try and see what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is. So let's look at this hello world bit. I'm going to, it's sort of hard to see both at the same time. Maybe I can drag this down here. And I'm going to save it, and it didn't update there, so I have to click the refresh button to see my new changes, which is what I would have expected. Yeah, you don't have to. You can. I mean, technically, it's better. You know, I did like oh, this is a header. Then that technically, you know, it's gonna use whatever the default header rendering is for that. But yeah, you don't have to actually wrap that with an element because it's actually what's known as a text element on the page. So we're going to add a script tag. This is the way that you load JavaScript on a web page. And I'm going to put it up in this head section of the file. A lot of times you would actually put it in the body, but I'm doing this so that just the way that we're going to render content on the page is going to overwrite our body, and at least for now. And so this is just making sure that we don't overwrite anything. And then I need to tell it what file, what's the name of the file I want to load. And this source is going to be relative to wherever the index.html file is at. So I don't have a file yet I'm going to create one. I'm going to create one and just call it index.js. And then I'm going to tell it I want to load index.js when I load my page. And gonna go ahead and put some content in index.js. I don't know if people remember, you can do console logs, but those won't show up in the web page. They show up in the console for the page. So if you want to change the content on the web page, the easiest way to do that is like a document.write will put some content on your web page. So I had something a little better than just hello world over here. Let me hijack that text I have. This is what I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I need my end quotes here. This is what I want to write. And then if I run my index.html file again and open it, we'll see what I had for my document.write is on my web page now. So now I'm able to write content onto my web page with my JavaScript file because it's actually running that JavaScript code in that web page. And it works again, whether you do it in another window or you open it in the preview here. So for the time being, it doesn't make a difference which route you take. It might be easy to open it in the preview because you don't have a whole nother window. They're just right there. And then let's say, oh, I don't actually want any content on the page except for what my JavaScript writes. So I'm just going to get rid of this body bit, refresh my page, and there we go. Any questions on this? It shouldn't be much different than just a console log that we've been using for our other output, right? So now we are going to do something that's just a little different than we've done anywhere else. And that is we're going to get some user input. So there's a function built into your browser, which is called prompt. And prompt, if you look at it, it looks a lot like, say, a console log or even this document write. We're just putting a string inside of it. Except what happens is it actually pops up a dialog prompting the user for some input. And then whatever they put in, it returns. So in this case, we're taking that value that gets returned from prompt and storing it in this name variable. So I don't want to shortcut too much. Let's go ahead and write this stuff out long form so that everyone can sort of see it being done that way. So I'm going to change this code that we had that was just the document write, and I'm going to recreate the code that we have here where I prompt. And then I'm going to do the document.write. You can see I get used to doing one thing. Put a period. Nice to meet you. And if we run this now instead of what we had before, and I'll just open it in the preview window here, you'll see I actually get a pop-up here telling you, what's your name? It's a prompt with the text that I gave it. And I can give it my name. There's a little bit of a bug, I think, that happens sometimes there, like the first time. And it'll go ahead and say, input the value that I gave it back in this next line. So hello, Jared, nice to meet you. And if I refresh the page and give it a different name, Ramiro, for example, it's changing the string, right? And that's because we're giving it a different value each time that it prompts us. Is this working for anybody? I see some people trying to reproduce this. Yeah, some people have it working. What's that? It's just loading forever. There is one thing I've noticed is there might be a little bit of a bug in this preview window where the first time that it prompts you after you've clicked run, it doesn't actually show the content. So if you refresh it, it sometimes works. I'm not sure what's going on there, but. Are there any questions about this? Just being able to get input this way. All right. I mean, feel free to ask them. Yeah.
Beyond like what we talked about, but like, so in this platform, it's easy to just point to the file because it's right there. Like, for one example, you're building a definition. Is it more complicated back to your index.js file?
In a real world, okay. Going to try, people can remind me if I forget, but I'm going to try and repeat the question because some of the people who watch remotely have been saying they don't hear it. So the question was, in the real world, you know, when you don't have everything just sitting right here, is it more complicated to point to your JavaScript file, like the index.js file? It can be, especially in a more complex site. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of complexity around building out websites, right? These things are as complex as any app that's ever been built nowadays. And so depending on the tooling that you use or the way that you build it, it can be much more complex. But even just very simple things will make it more complex. Like usually if you're building out a website, you won't just have your .html and your .js file right there. You'll do something like you'll create a JS folder or something, and you'll have index.js inside of there, or maybe different JavaScript files. And then in here, instead of just saying index.js, you'd have to say like js/, and that assumes that they're in the same path and that the paths are correct. This is where you'll start seeing, you know, we did some of this ... stuff when we were working on just the command line. That's where you'll start seeing some of that, because you'll say, oh, actually, I need to move down a folder and sort of navigate around to find the right place for the file. So it won't always be just as simple as pointing at it just like this. Yeah. Yes?
So what happens when the prompt comes up and you don't enter anything, but you click OK or you click cancel? Does it matter?
Actually, one of the homework things even gets into a little bit of that type of stuff too. So let's see what happens. I don't know the answer to all of this. I'm gonna click cancel. Ooh, hello, null. We were talking earlier, how do you get null in your code? That's an example of how you can end up with a null value. Because what happened was we canceled. It's still assigned a value from that prompt, but it just returned to null in that case as opposed to an actual value.
You press OK, it just says.
Yes. I'll bet you the reason is because it's actually an empty string then. So we could check that real fast. Like we could say if name, and I'll do a triple equals so that it won't convert the type, equals an empty string. Document.write. Please provide a name. And I might say else if, and we can deal with maybe the null case, right? If name equals null, or maybe I'll put those two together because I want to do the same thing. I'll say if name is an empty string. Let me just test it bit by bit first though. I want to run this before I put more logic in there. Test every tiny bit of logic that I change. So now I added a little bit of logic for the empty string. Let's see what happens. It did say please provide a name. So I know that it's working in an empty string and catching that case. And now I also, so I'll say or if name is null, please provide a name. Otherwise, that's not right. Go ahead and prompt them or say hello to them. So now we can see, oh, it didn't work. That's interesting. So let's, I'm gonna do this because I don't know why that's the case. So we're gonna have to do some debugging and figure out what's going on. I'm gonna output the type of name, which is going to be a string, to the document here to do a little debugging. And when I click cancel, it says it was actually a string and not an object. If you remember null, even though it's its own type, returns object. So it's getting back the null string.
So the cancel gives it null, but then it's converting that to a string
before it gets there, I'm guessing. So yeah, so let's try this. Maybe this is what it is. Is it the null string? Yeah, please provide a name. So it's actually, yeah, it's doing all the null logic outside of even the context of this. By the time it's in this name value, it's the literal string null.
So this will trip you guys up a lot because like people are going to do, you know, like you're going to write your web page to do a certain thing and the user's going to tell you you're not expecting.
Yep.
You're going to break it, so then you're going to figure out what's going wrong. This is exactly like the process of how to make your site as robust as possible.
Oh yeah. I think I'm really glad you pointed that out. I think I can add even more to the homework. So, you know, in the second round of stuff I'm working on, I'll add some more stuff for some more robustness because I only have a little bit to start touching on it, but I think having a lot more of that will be really useful. Yeah, this code's starting to get pretty ugly now, right? Ugh. Not easy to read, not easy to figure out what's going on, but I'm trying to deal with these little edge cases. That's what happens in your code. You've got your nice, good, positive path, and then your code can frequently get cluttered up with all the edge cases that you don't want to have happen. And we'll be introducing some tools and other things that help keep your code organized so that you don't have to get lost looking at all the edge cases when you're dealing with the positive path going forward. Really appreciate that. That was good. Any other questions or thoughts on this right now? All right. Then I have one other topic I wanted to go over today, and it's nothing major. It's just talking about comments a little more. So I wanted to, it's basically just a big comment that I think if you read the notes, it's easier to pick this stuff up there. But there's two different types of comments that exist in JavaScript. We've used these single line comments. Single line comments always start with 2 slashes. And anything after the slashes is the comment. So you'll see that if you're looking up here, you can actually even have code on the line like this name assignment before a comment and then put a comment later on that same line just by putting the 2 slashes there. But if those slashes are at the start of the line, like this bar number equals 42, then none of that code's going to execute. Or the key for a single line comment is you have to put the slashes on every line for it. A multi-line comment is, examples right here. And multi-line comments start with a slash star and end with a star slash. And anything in between them is part of the comment. It doesn't matter what it is. So it's just useful sometimes if you don't, you're going to be writing a long comment. You've got a really tricky bit of code and you're putting an explanation in your code about what's going on. It can be useful to put this multi-line comment so you're not having to put a slash on each line there. Yes? Can you comment stuff in HTML? You can, yes. Since it's a different language, HTML comments are different than JavaScript comments. So let's go ahead and put this, for example, this H1 back in. This says hello world. And I'll run our code here. I'll provide my name, doesn't matter that much. And you'll see, hello Jared, nice to meet you, and then hello world. Let's say I want this out for the time being, but maybe I don't want it deleted because I might want to put it back in. I'm just testing something about my markup. The HTML comments is, you start it with a bracket, then an exclamation mark, and a couple dashes. And there's no single line comment for HTML. So you end it with a couple dashes and the other, the greater than symbol as opposed to the less than, and anything in between that is commented out. So now if we looked at this again, that's not getting printed on the screen anymore. But you'll notice like a mistake that you'll make when you're dealing with multi-line comments, and you'll see it right here because it gives me some nice syntax highlighting. Do you see the mistake that's going on there now? What's that? See, the syntax highlighting helps a lot with that. It was a pain in the butt before we had these nice features. So yeah, I didn't close my comment. I didn't end it. And mind you, my code might work because HTML is incredibly robust and able to render badly marked up HTML. Like browsers can figure out how to do all sorts of stuff that they shouldn't be able to render because people have written really bad HTML and they need to work with it. But the body and the closing HTML tag here are commented out when I didn't intend for them to be commented out. And that's because I forgot to close my comments. I forgot to end it right here. No, still did it wrong. And you see my syntax highlighting show, oh, all right. Here's your other stuff, it's back. It's a good question. Anything else? So one thing that I find really useful with comments, especially when you're learning how to program and you're trying to figure out, when you're trying to solve a problem, is comments are a great way to put notes in your code or thoughts in your code before you've figured out how to write it as code. So if, for example, let's write a really small little program. We're just gonna write, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something pretty simple. We're gonna write just something that checks if my name is Jared or Ramiro, and if so, it says, hello, Code the Dream instructor, right? So you might use comments when you're trying to think through that by saying things. You can literally pretty much write out your thoughts before you even start writing your code if you want to do that. You might say, check if name is Jared. Check if name is Ramiro. And then you might, oh, okay, I have this comment here. It's helping remind me what I want to do. So I'm going to put a name up here. Maybe I didn't remember how to write this if statement at first, or maybe it's something much more complex than that. I don't remember how to output something now. And so I'm going to put a comment here that says, print greeting. And so it can be really useful as well because that comment can be there knowing what you intend to do next, even when you haven't written that portion of code yet. So I may have something here that, I don't remember how to do this greeting. I don't know. This is very contrived in this case, right? Because if I know how to do a console log like this, then I'll know it. But let's say it's something more complex that I'm trying to do here, and I don't remember how to do it. I can have this here and run my code and know, oh yeah, I'm going to put this other logic in this place. I just don't have it there yet, right? So comments are just a really, really useful tool to use when you're trying to think about how to write a program. Feel free to literally like write it out almost in plain English is what you're trying to do in comments first. And then you've got this set of guideposts that you can say, okay, now how do I translate each portion of that into the code that I want to accomplish that task? And that'll help you out a lot when you're breaking down larger problems, because it lets you put these little notes in there about what you want to do, lets you break them down into these smaller problems that you solve, and then build on top of that. Yeah.
Just to add to that, like just yesterday, I know I have a coworker that's getting, and he wrote like the bulk of a certain part of the program, and he's moving, he's leaving, and so fortunately he comments really well in really multiple ways. So we went back, we're like kind of looking through it, and we sort of see his line of thought. But if he didn't comment, it could be like kind of like a maddening process to try to follow how somebody was thinking. So that's the other like reason to try to get in the habit of commenting to kind of help yourself, but also when you have a coding job, people that are coming after you when you're code trying to think about attention to build off.
Right. Let me give you a better example, because I like that. Let's use more of a real world example. Let's go back to this program that we had, and we put in this extra if conditional here, which is checking, and we're doing that because the prompt, right? So we may put a couple comments in here, or maybe I'll even do a multi-line comment in this case, because it's going to be saying some stuff. If the user clicks OK without inputting anything, the prompt returns the string null. Let me make sure I close my comment as well. If they click cancel, you're right. Cancel. Prompt returns string null. User clicks OK without inputting anything. The prompt returns an empty string. Guarding for these possibilities here, right? So now I've got a little comment in my code that's not just, it's explaining what this bit of logic is doing. So now somebody can go look at this code, and if they don't understand why that logic's there, why are they just looking for the null string? That's really weird that they're doing that. Oh, has something to do with the way that they're prompting for the input and the values that this could end up being. Okay, that's useful to know, and it really helped explain what's going on with that code.
You can comment so you don't lose yourself either. Because I was working on CSS about this past week, and I put some specific comments. If I didn't put those comments in, I would I'll probably spend like an extra 5 minutes just scrolling up and down the script, like looking like for something that I need to fix or something like that. So that's what I usually put comments.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different uses for them. That's a use case where you can use them. If you end up with a really long file, sometimes comments are just a way to delimit a portion of the file and say, like, this section of the file deals with this stuff, you know? It's a way to structure stuff like that as well. But I definitely encourage you. You'll see there's a lot of opinions on comments out there. You'll see some people say you should never put comments in your code. Your code should be written clearly, so you don't need to write comments. And if your code isn't clear, then change the way it's written so that it's self-describing instead of having comments. You'll see people say, never put comments that just describe what the code does. Put explanatory comments that explains why it does something. I think at first, when you're learning, you shouldn't feel discouraged from pretty much putting any comments in your code. Feel free to put whatever comments you feel are adding value to you, and then over time you might start looking at it again and going, you know what, I guess it really doesn't add value to me to say, like, over time maybe you end up with some stuff that says true and you've got some logic. You know, that may be a really useful comment to you right now because it's helping to remind you of what's actually happening in the code. Once you become really experienced with programming, you may look at that thing and go, well, that's a pointless comment. Of course, that's what that line of code is doing. That's obvious to most people, right? But don't be discouraged to put comments in for just about anything right now, because it'll just really help you, A, get in the habit of learning to describe what you're trying to do, and B, I hope that you get in the habit of thinking about what you want to do before you start writing the code, so that your comments are these sort of waypoints about where you're trying to go. Any other questions on comments, thoughts on comments? No. I want to preview the homework. Lesson 5 itself. Let's just see if I have anything else, which I don't think I do. All right. So now the rest of this class period, and I encourage anybody who's watching this remotely, please feel free to engage with this actively right now during this next, roughly hour and a half if you want. But I'm going to, if you want to, I'll send out the link again or post it. But I've got some homework up for this class, and it's really based off of the stuff that we've learned from the last class and trying to have you get some practice in using some conditional logic, using looping, getting some input from users. And I just want people to take the chance to work through some of this and start practicing it. It's useful to do that a lot of times when you're here because you can feel free to ask questions. That's why I'm going to stop the video. I don't want to just be sitting here with a lot of dead airtime on the video, but ask questions, both put your hands up, ask questions for anyone here about something going wrong in the code, talk to each other about what you're doing if you're stuck on it. And also during this next hour and a half, I'd love to see a lot of interaction and engagement on Slack if you're figuring out how to solve something that was tricky for you and you're like, oh man, I figured this out, or you're having a hard time with something. Ask questions on Slack as well. I really want people to get sort of in the habit of doing that. And by having this as a dedicated class time to work through some of that stuff, I hope, A, it'll help people just feel like they're able to ask those questions right now because this time is already set aside, but also just get in the habit of helping to support each other and answer these questions. Any questions before I end this, or we go ahead and start working on these things? No? All right, I'm gonna stop the broadcast for this one and then